Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and for this week we'll be taking a look at the Chaos Engine. But as always, before we get into that, I'd just like to say that this is actually episode 30. Now, I'm more amazed than anybody else that we've actually got this far. I mean, it only seems like 5 minutes ago that I was announcing that it was episode 25, but my god, we are really racking up the numbers. Now, in case anybody's interested, I did hold a CD32 history vote over the last couple of weeks. I did that via the Facebook page and Twitter. Happy to say I got loads of votes on that. It was a bit of a mix across both, but only 2 people didn't want me to do the special. I'm not sure why. I think they just wanted me to stick to the games, but I'm afraid I'm going to go with the please do it votes. I think we've got at least 20, which is quite a lot of a response for something like that, a freewheeling vote. But it just means I'm going to sit down soon and I'll start working my way through the history. I'll play the launch games and dig out what I can from various articles and books and stuff. And yeah, so look forward to that. I've no idea when it's going to come out, but hopefully over the next month or so I'll put some proper time into it. Now, that's going to be a free episode. I know people think because I'm on Patreon that I might be hiding away content and stuff like that. I'm not going to do that. This will be a normal episode. It will replace a game episode probably. It all depends on how long it is, but that's up and coming, so look forward to it. Another thing I noticed in Amiga news this week, basically a game we've mentioned before on the podcast, Bombjack Beer Edition has literally just been completed a few hours before I started recording, so I was really lucky to catch this bit of news. Basically, this has been developed by Graham Cowie. He's announced this on his Facebook page and it's online and stuff, and I will post a link in the show notes and descriptions. If you want to click link now and you're on the listing, you can pop over to Indie Retro News because they've got all the details on there. But I mean, I've not even had time to play this. I just saw this before we started recording, and it looks absolutely fantastic from all the footage I've seen. A quick flick through with the video and the pictures and stuff, and it looks like a great arcade port. It's really sharpened up the controls, I believe, and on top of that, they've added like extra backgrounds and maybe some more levels as well on top. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah. Anyway, go and look into it. It's been really interested to watch that develop, especially. I think that's been, it's probably about 5 or 6 months since I last looked at that closely. Now, something else I wanted to mention. One thing you're probably not aware of that, but when I come around to do like research and stuff for each episode, a lot of the time I have to, I'll go online, I'll go through old magazines and interviews and things like that. One thing in particular I like to do is go back through old magazine scans, and it's not something because I haven't got piles upon piles of Amiga magazines lay around. To be honest, I really haven't. I'm only in a small flat and I really haven't got the room, so it's always great when I can go to people on different forums and places and stuff. And I was chatting to, I've been doing this for a while now, to a chap called Carlton over on the Romuck forum, and he's helped me a great deal with getting several mags. Really hard to find ones. I couldn't find them online or anything. Really tough to track down, so big thumbs up to him. And as a thank you, he has released literally just now a game over on iTunes and for the iPhone format, and it's basically called Very Iconic Pixels. Now, the bit of blurb that goes with this is: put your 80s knowledge to the test with the VIP 80s Retro Pixel Quiz. We're taking you time traveling in the DeLorean back to the world of 80s music, movies, TV and sport, where you'll identify iconic pixel art characters to score stars and progress along the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Those 80s hairdos are hard to forget, but can you recognise these celebrities and famous characters in 8-bit? What about just from their silhouettes? There are clues up for grabs if you need them, but you've got to have faith that you'll do it alone. So step aside Rubik's Cube, because there's a new 80s game in town. Now, of course, I haven't got an iPhone, I'm afraid, so I'm not been able to play this, but it does look pretty good from the stuff I could see on the web and the pictures and things, and it is like it's retro gaming related, so I thought it was well worth a mention. You can get to it by going to tinyurl.com/VIPixels. I'll also post links in the show notes, but again, a big thank you to Carlton, because I know he's been a huge help, and he will be in future, because I'm sure he gets annoyed whenever I'm dropping him messages saying, oh, have you got such and such a mag stashed away? I'm always having problems with stuff like that, and he's a great help. Oh, by the way, if anyone else feels they've got stuff like that to help, I'm always happy to take help wherever possible. This show just wouldn't be possible without you guys, and a big thank you to everyone. I mean, God, we're 30 episodes in now, and I'm always happy to hear from people and for you lot to get involved with the show. It just makes it a better experience for everyone involved and everybody who's listening. And again, a big thank you to everyone who has contributed, even if you're just listening or sharing the show or mentioning it on Twitter and stuff like that. By the way, if you do want to help us out, you can always come and pop along to @AMIGArama pod on Twitter. I'm always on there. I do post there regular every day with pictures on Amiga games and magazine scans and things like that. It's quite a good community. But yeah, as always, all that details will be in the show notes in the description below. And with that, it's time to move on to this week's game. And for this week, we are covering, of course, the Chaos Engine. Now, I will say before I begin that I have approached this with a bit of fear, really. I don't really know how to put it, but I did play this back in the day, and I have to say, at the time, I knew it was a good game. I knew what was expected of it. Everyone was ranting and raving and saying how great it was. But even at the time as a kid, it just didn't click with me. I just didn't get it. And then in recent times, I've been hearing more and more talk about it. And I've been thinking, I need to come back to this. It's one of the big ones. I need to tackle it. So I had this fear when I come back to it that it's going to be just like I remember. I don't understand what people are going on about. So I was very worried about what people might think of my opinions. I mean, then again, it has been 20 odd years since I played it properly. But one thing I will mention is that Dan from Lemon Tube Amiga basically agreed to do like a 2-player playthrough on it, just to give me a good experience of the game, give me some footage to put out for the episode. I'm sure if you go over to AMIGArama.com or the YouTube channel, you'll see that gameplay going on. That's actually 2 real people playing the game. It's not me and the AI. Which gave me a really good introduction, and it was interesting to get back into that. Lemon Tube Amiga is a fantastic Amiga channel. I know I've mentioned it before, but he will appreciate being mentioned. He doesn't get too many views, and we are a small Amiga community, so the more interest we can get for other people and the more we can help spread the word, the better, I think. But yeah, sorry, let's jump into it. Now, the publisher for it was Renegade, who did huge games like the Sensible Soccer series, SWAS, that sort of thing. Things like Gods, that's the very chunky platformer. Elfmania, which is like a fighting game with elves. That's been mentioned on the Twitter feed a few times as a recommended title. The developer was Bitmap Brothers, who pretty much did most of the games like that, and Magic Pockets, which is probably my earliest memory of them as a developer, really. And I think I used to see that on it was Live and Kicking on BBC One, which was a huge, if you're in the US you'll have no idea, but it was like a huge TV show every Saturday morning, and it'd have a couple of presenters on, and there'd be loads of kids around the studio, and they'd just be playing games and doing like news items and playing, all sorts went on, and there was lots of slime and water guns and all sorts of crazy business. It was a very, very peculiar time in the 90s when that sort of thing was going on. They don't seem to do that anymore. It just seems to be mostly cartoons these days, but maybe that's just a UK thing. But it was very, very odd at the time. But Magic Pockets was basically, I'm not sure if it was the game was released originally or they just did a port from that to the Amiga, and it basically had someone sat there while someone else phoned in, and they were telling them to press like 5 or pressing the key to make them jump, and then they would repeat it on screen and play the game along. Anyway, I'm getting really off hilter there, but that was Bitmap Brothers behind all that. They were very, very famous in the Amiga scene, and I don't think I've even covered them before, have I? I'm not entirely sure. No, I've gone off to, yeah, I've done no, I haven't. What can I say? What can I say? Right, it came out in, let's move on quickly. Came out in 1993, and that was the ECS and the OCS editions. Then later on in 94, it was upgraded to AGA, which is also the CD32 at the same time. Now, the AGA version is the one that I've been playing with Dan, and I've been covering for this, but it's the only real difference is I think it might have had maybe some slight bug fixes done. I couldn't see that from anything that was referenced online. But it did have the artwork improved to take advantage of more colours. Now, I have had a look at the two versions. You can sort of see a difference, but it's not anything major, and both of the games run pretty well. But if you can, I would say go for the AGA version, or CD32 is just better. It came out on 2 discs and was priced at £25.99. That seems to be pretty much the average price for games at the time. It was 2 players. I've put a note down again saying to mention Dan. Again, a big thank you to Dan. I've never done anything like this, and if anyone hasn't heard of Amiga Live, you should go over to that. I think it's run by the Guru Meditation YouTube channel. I can't remember the exact name of their channel, but fantastic guys, do some great Amiga stuff. But basically a website with all these Amiga games on, and it runs like FSUAE, and you can play like 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, whatever Amiga games online with different people, and it's as if you're running it off the same Amiga. And it was quite easy, and we did have some struggles with getting the controllers to work, but that was more of a Windows general thing. But once we got past that, it worked like a dream. It was absolutely fantastic. The coders for this, first up, was a chap called Mike Montgomery. He also did the sequel, Chaos Engine 2, which was released right at the end of the Amiga's life. From what I could tell in an interview, he wouldn't actually tell Retro Gamer how many copies it actually sold, but from what I could gather from different places, it was less than 5,000 copies, which, for an Amiga game, that's incredibly poor. But that as a title itself, it seems to be incredibly popular. I mean, weirdly, I tend to stick to the games I'm playing. I don't really dig into the sequels very often, but I'll probably go on to that at some point. He was also responsible for coding Gods, Speedball 2, Xenon. He had a huge library of games. I'm picking some of the best examples. The next up was Steve Cargill. I think we mentioned him before. He also did Chaos Engine 2. He only did a few games, this guy. Very, very weirdly, after the Chaos Engine games, he did the first Garfield game, and then Garfield Winter's Tale, which are just basically terrible licensed platformers. What a very odd thing to go on to. I mean, especially for the amount of work that he must have been doing for this. I mean, for the game it was a big hit at the time, a very, very big hitter. The music for the game was done by Richard Joseph, who is an absolutely classic chap. I've mentioned him so many times on this podcast before, but he was pretty much all over the Amiga's library, did some amazing music. Probably some of my favourite was from the Sensi games. The graphics were done by a chap called Dan Malone. Again, he did Chaos Engine 2, Speedball 2, Cadaver. Now, if you're familiar with them games, they've all got that sort of like that Bitmap Brothers, big chunky graphical style. As well, we had Herman Serrano. He was behind the likes of Exile. Now, I think that's an old BBC game converted over. Something called Weird Dreams, which is a very, very odd platformer, where taking part in dreams, oddly enough, with people's nightmares. And he also did things like Liberation 2 and Wing Commander. It's really involved in some classic games. Now, the early previews for this started to appear around 1991. Now, since it came out in 93, that's a hell of a long time from original development to release, because most of the Amiga games are for like 6 to 12 months. 2 years if you're unlucky enough, or the development overran, so this is very odd at being almost 3 years long, I think. The game itself, it's a run and gun top-down shooter. It's very steampunk, I said, with them chunky graphics, and it's very, very similar to Gauntlet in the way it works. You basically got a maze and you're working your way around. Now, from what I could tell, Mike Gomery has said that Gauntlet most likely influenced them the most when they were coming up with the idea for the game and coming up with designs and stuff. I suppose, late 80s, early 90s, you didn't have much of a games library to go back on, and you were all coming up with these random ideas, and you look at something like Gauntlet, and it's a bit of a good dungeon explorer in a way, and that classic explorer fun, and there's no real guns in that, unless you include like being able to throw some of the weapons. When you first open the game, you're introduced to this really thumping and beating, it's like a techno sort of dance track. It's very, very odd and start. It's very loud. It's like the banging of metal drums and that sort of thing. And that was composed by a group called Joy, J-O-I, who I think were quite a big dance band at the time. I know nothing about dance music. I'm proper showing my ignorance there. But they did most of the music, I think, or were involved with it at least, because there's a lot of remix mixed into the main tracks. Now, the game originally had 3 characters on the screen. And the final version just has 2. I thought this was quite interesting to hear, because it was basically like in the preview and early development. They had a much more sprawling game in mind, I think they were going to do with characters and stuff. During development, they did actually have 12 characters to choose from, rather than the 6 that were included. One of them was a female lead, but due to development time and features and stuff, they basically cut it down to 6. The full game itself only has 1 boss. That sounds quite odd straight away, especially for the time, but from what I could see from Mike Montgomery, he was basically saying that they were trying to break the mold for these type of games, for Gauntlet style action adventure in a way. So they really wanted to move away from the typical, do 1 or 2 levels, have a boss at the end and have a mass fault. It was released in the US, but strangely they renamed it to Soldiers of Fortune. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they did that. And something else of note, this might sound like an odd one, but there's a rather unique password system. The passwords change depending on how well you do during the game on first player and single player, and if you go through it in 2 players, it's completely different, and you can of course use that code on any other copy of the game anywhere in the world. So even if you play it today, you can go and reload it on somewhere else, and it tracks it all very, very well. It's effectively an early version of a save file, but it's not too complicated. I think it's about 10 characters long. It's a bit random letters and stuff rather than words. But I think, as you'll see when we go through the game, it'll sort of be self-explanatory. Usually at this point I would dig straight into the game story, but oddly when I went looking for the manual, and I got a couple of different downloads, I couldn't actually find mention of one. And I did various searches online, and I get kept being pointed back to Wikipedia, and there is a plot on there, but the actual scans and the printouts of the manual don't seem to have one in, so I'm not entirely sure what's happened there, or maybe this story wasn't included at all, or maybe it was some sort of like a novel add-in or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. It might just be that the scans I've all seen have just got that section missing, but I don't think so from what I could see. Anyway, the story goes. The setting is a steampunk Victorian era England. A time traveller on a reconnaissance mission from the distant future became stranded in England of the late 1800s, and his technology came into the hands of the Royal Society, led by Baron Fortesque, based upon Charles Babbage, a grand inventor. Fortesque then retro-engineered many of the futuristic contraptions, creating an entirely different alternative timeline. This is that sort of like way it explains all the steampunkness that's involved in it. That seemed to be a pretty big thing in the 90s. That seems to have disappeared in recent years. What can I say? It's a bit like being a goth, I suppose. When you're a kid, when they all grow up, they just it all just vanishes. Anyway, what a sidestep. Baron Fortesque then succeeded in his greatest creation yet, the Chaos Engine, which was able to experiment with matter and the very nature of space and time. Unfortunately for the rest of the Proud Kingdom, the engine then proceeded to become sentient and captured and assimilated its creator, then began to change the countryside for the worse. Vile monsters and destructive automaton appeared everywhere, and even prehistoric beasts were resurrected. Telegram wires connecting the British Isles to the European mainland are cut, and any ship attempting to enter a British port is attacked. The British royal family, along with members of parliament and a large number of refugees, managed to escape across the sea, bringing with them many tales of horror. The British Empire is left in tatters and the world in economic and political chaos. This lures a number of mercenaries on a potentially rewarding quest to infiltrate the quarantined Britain, find the root of the problem and swiftly bring a full stop to it. Now, before the game starts, you get to choose from 2 different characters from a selection of 6. In the single player game, one of them is AI. There always has to be 2 players on the screen. The characters include a gentleman that uses a pistol, a thug that uses a shotgun. Each have got their own different weapon with different ranges and attributes, and you've also got a preacher, a mercenary, a brigand, I think it was called a navy or a navvy, I'm not entirely sure. But you can level the characters up between levels, and right at the beginning they've all got different characterizations and different speeds and skills and the way they use weapons and stuff. So straight away for an action game you're probably starting to think, oh, you can actually level up. That sounds like from something much later. The screen itself, when it first loads, it will scroll in any direction pretty much, so that's 8 directions, up, down, left, right, and directional basically, so it does follow the character movement. Along the bottom of the screen you get to see both characters, that only one of which you can use at any one time. You get listed things like lives, points, stamina they've got, special abilities that they can use, number of nodes. Basically you collect a number of nodes to open the exit at the end, and the money that can be collected. Now the special ability is different per characters, and it things like bombs, grenades, a map, like being able to heal another character. That's something like the preacher that does stuff like that. Being similar in style to Gauntlet, the idea of each level is basically to work your way through a maze, collect enough items and money, and then enough nodes to actually open the exit, which is usually a gate or a huge set of doors. And dotted throughout each stage, like I say, you've got things like keys, which will open doors within the stage itself, and they'll contain things like some secret rooms, which might be more health, weapon upgrades. There's also save points dotted around each stage. Now, one thing I did notice, which is very different, and the way you level up actually, every other level a shop appears, and you can effectively buy things like special abilities and different skills. You've got a choice of skills, so like speed, health, extra lives, stamina, things like that. It does add an interesting aspect to the way that you deal with your characters. It's not just a standard run and gun. You do actually have to consider things carefully and what you're going to level up, and it all of course depends on how much money you've collected. They're all priced at different levels of course, and if the more money you've got, the more you can buy, but over time you can build things up, and the character that you control on screen does actually improve. Now of course the main aim of every level is to make it to the exit, but you basically have to survive. There are several monsters throughout the entire game. I think there's only about 7 or 8 in total. There's not a great difference there, but when one in particular that comes to mind was, which I found the most annoying, was these super jumping frogs which jump off in diagonal directions every single time, and are really quick and difficult to track down. But then you've got things like trolls, or I think maybe they were gargoyles, I don't know what else to call them. A lot of things that take a hell of a lot of bullets, and a lot of rooms that you come into, there'll be like a little square area you run in, and it might be like an absolute death trap. There's things being flung at you from up above, and you've got to run and dodge the bullets, and you've got to move very quickly. And it sort of reminded me away of an old classic arcade game called Smash TV, and you're effectively being funneled into these like action arenas. You can of course escape if you run, and then run a bit of distance away and then sneak your way back in to take things out, but it's very fast paced, so it doesn't seem to promote that sort of play. It tends to push you towards, the big action grab. One thing of course, because you are effectively using 2 people to go through each stage, which is fine if you've got another person, but in single player you haven't. Usually that sort of thing that a game would fall over because the AI just wouldn't be good enough. But when I was playing this through on the single player, the AI was pretty much spot on. I didn't have any problems with it. It really was competent. And one of the other things, you know, in a two-player game, you're a bit of a battle because when you collect money yourself, you both get that money that you've collected. But in the single-player game, you both share the money that the other players collected as well. So there's no battling to improve the characters separately on the single player. The graphics for this are absolutely fantastic. It's your typical Bitmap Brothers, the cyber thing that they did for like Gods and Magic Pocket. You know, they have a very real high standard, and everything is really well defined. Each character, you can tell what it is, you know it is. They're nice and big, they fit the level quite well. The designs match the area of each one that you're in, you know, if it's like a sewers or a castle or a metallic zone or a factory or something like that. Everything is well defined. I was quite impressed with it. I mean, straight away when you look at this, you're just thinking, this isn't like a simple platformer or a standard top-down, say, action game like Commando with basic looking graphics. They really have gone overboard with this, and they really have done some nice work with it, with the individual graphics, especially with the character designs as well. I really did like them. Of course, a big action game like this wouldn't really be much without a decent soundtrack, and a lot of Amiga games use for stuff like this. They don't put much in, and you know, sometimes I'd be confused because the Amiga is really good as a sound system, but not in Chaos Engine. They really have gone overboard, and it sounds absolutely fantastic what is in there. There's a lot of remixes of the opening tune, of course. I think from what I could tell, there was over 30 minutes of original music for it, with a few remixes added in there, but it really is fantastic. It's very strong. It's like a dance and techno beat, and it sounds futuristic, and it really draws you in, especially when you're running around in the fast action pace, and it's all like beating drums and metallic noises and stuff like that. It's absolutely fantastic. Of course, mixed in with that rapid opening theme right from the beginning, you know that you're in for something special. Add to that, the sound effects sound absolutely fantastic throughout. The weapons are very satisfying when you take out the enemies and stuff. And the biggest thing about this is the use of voices throughout. They sound really it's nothing amazing. It's just like I said, like the exit is open and things like that, you know, just a few one dotted around, but they're really clear. It sounds like a proper person talking to you, not like just through some like synthesizer or something like that. Usually on a game like this for the Amiga, I would only ever get as far as doing the one-player game, and I did do that myself and play it through properly, and you know, really made the effort. The difficulty was quite well up there, and I did get stuck in a few places, but where this thing really shone was in the two-player edition. I think pretty much this is how it should be played, and I had an absolutely fantastic time playing this through with Dan over on Lemontude and Amiga. Now, we did it over an evening. It must have taken about an hour to 2 hours, and I think we played through over half the game via Amiga Live, and in total I think there's 4 worlds in all, with 4 levels each, and each have got their own music and their own soundtrack, and it's got a different theme to it, and it just worked really well. And you had to take some time to plan certain sections out. You could have one person running in ahead, and you did it in proper groups. One stayed back a bit. We had Dan was doing the preacher, and I was using the Fug just to shoot him. I do regret using the Fug through that playthrough. Like I say, you can see it through the gameplay footage on the YouTube channel. But the fantastic thing about it was like proper co-op play that you get today. And we were talking over Skype between us, but back in the day, you'd been playing this live on your Amiga in like an actual living room or something. But I can just imagine the fun you would have just talking between each other and try to work your way through the levels and taking your time and planning stuff out, and not just like bombarding through like a typical action game. You know, you would actually have to play it carefully and share the rewards and the upgrades and stuff. I mean, there was many a time where he would just rush in and get something, and I'd do the same. Probably shouldn't have been doing that. Should have been talking more, but it allows for both. It really does give you a good chance to explore and go through the levels properly if you want to, or you can act like absolute maniacs and just go charging through each section. The game is open enough that it lets you respond well to whatever playstyle that you really want to do. And I'd never really played anything to that style or that in depth as a co-op play game before on the Amiga, so it was quite new to me and really quite surprising, especially this early on, I suppose, in the 16-bit life. I mean, we weren't really, I don't think we were used to games. To me, that sort of thing was happening when I was playing things like Halo, probably about 6 or 7 years later. It was really when co-op and multiplayer was taking off and going into like high-speed internet areas and stuff. But to be able to do something like this on Chaos Engine, it was, for me, it's pretty much unheard of, and I've never really seen anything like it before. What I'm really trying to say is that this is a really, really frantic game. There's so much going on so quickly. A lot of the time you can't really stop and think, especially if there's a couple of players in there with you, because you've really got to be moving around to get stuff sorted quickly, and it really pushes you on to keep going out throughout the entire stage and really explore, and then try and reach the exit, of course, as you would. But of course, it does have its problems. The first one will be that I really, really would have liked to have seen the missing 6 characters that were mentioned. I mean, it does really feel like it needs them characters, because you've only got 6, and bear in mind you're playing with 2 every single time, so you effectively, in 3 playthroughs, you can effectively see each different character very, very quickly, and I think having 12 would have given you more of a mix-up and been able to do a lot more with it, but that's life, I suppose. It just got cut. Now, a lot of the levels, I also noticed, they tended to wrap around a single area. I mean, there was one, I think it was stage 3, especially I was playing it with Dan, where you had a central point which had a load of gates going off in 4 directions. You would go out through one gate at the bottom, go around through the level, come up, go off to the right, back down, and you're in the starting area. Cross up and go right and out. And you had to do this to go and like collect the nose and maybe get some keys and things, which was sort of fine. But a lot of the stages did this, I think, a bit too many times. I don't think it was a massive problem, but in a few areas it just felt like they were padding it out just to stretch the level out a bit. But having said that, bear in mind, I'd never played it to this degree before, and I know Dan's plays it to death, so he's quite an expert at it, but he really knew his way through the levels, and even me just playing through it that way, there's not a lot to learn for the actual level design. It's not too confusing. You don't actually get lost, but in a way it sort of works against it. I don't know. It's a slight grievance rather than a major complaint. One other issue I did have, it only seemed to use one fire button. You don't really need it too much, but you need to use like the left shift key on the Amiga to be able to select something else. But I mean, again, it's nothing major, but it would have been so much easier, especially with the CD32 version, if they just used a couple more buttons on the pad. Would have just been a lot nicer, maybe expanded the game a bit more. Now, I know they wanted to move away from the idea of having multiple bosses, or one every other level or something like that, or maybe every 3rd stage or something, but I really felt like it needed the bosses throughout the game, because it needs that added challenge. The bosses give you a focal area, you work your way through a level, you've got a boss, it's a bit of a challenge, you spend a lot of time trying to defeat it and then move on. You could still have the fantastic level design and the way it all works, and maybe a bit less of the mazes and more of a focal point, maybe a little bit of a mid-boss and then an end-boss towards something later on. I don't know, but it just feels like there's no real challenge throughout levels, because there's not enough like multiple different types of enemies. Like I said, there's only 7 or 8 throughout the entire game, and it's just not enough. It needed to be a bit more, and maybe a couple of bosses dotted around would just give them that much more of a challenge. When you eventually come to the final stage, and a bit of a spoiler here, guys, so skip forward a few seconds if you don't want to hear it, but you basically go up against a supercomputer. It's not a really, really difficult battle, but the thing is, you could have done with a few more bits like that throughout the stage. I did play this with pretty much all of the characters, because I did try a good while on the single player first before I went into the multiplayer. But like some of the characters, especially the Thug, I just chose that at first. I was playing it with Dan, but I really did not get on with the Thug. He was very, very slow and poor to use, and he had like a shotgun where the bullets spread out, and the more powerful it got, they would go further and more of a spread out range. But it was a bit weak and a bit poor to control. But I mean, I get the idea about it, but the thing is, when you've cut out so many other characters, I think it doesn't help the game in a way to have too many limiting factors, and it needed just them extra characters just to make it more explorable and to have more fun with it. And I just felt they missed a trick there by not putting them in. I was thinking, I suppose they had been spent like what felt like a million years developing it, so they were probably at a point where they just needed to get it out of the door. It just goes to show, though, that there really isn't that many problems. Everything I've mentioned, it's just minor gripes, real. There's nothing over the top, nothing too frustrating. Little tweaks here and there would have made it an even better game. Let's move on to the magazine scores. Now, the mags at the time absolutely loved this to bits. It was very highly rated. Amiga Action gave it 92%. Amiga Computing came in next at 90%. Amiga Power 89%. The One 85, CU Amiga 81. You know, these were very, very high scores, and I'll have to say straight away, especially with my intrepidation phase when I first came back to this, I do actually agree with them. They sort of had the same sort of gripes that I did, really. But overall, they really, really loved this and thought it was a fantastic game. And I will say that, you know, especially playing this in 2-player, I had awesome fun with it. I mean, we played it for a couple of hours, but I really had a fantastic time with this in the multiplayer, and it made it a completely different experience to what I was playing when it was in single player. I mean, it wasn't a bad experience by far, but I can see its limitations when you're exploring on your own. But when you play it with someone else, it really does become something different. And I would say just go out there if you can and get a copy of Amiga Live. It's included as part of that package, and just give it a go because it's absolutely fantastic. Now, that did have the odd issue with my gameplay really than the game itself. It can be quite tough to get through sections, but all of it is defeatable. I never felt like I was in a situation where the game was to blame. It was doing things wrong, or there was like dodgy collision detection or anything like that. It feels very fair, and you know, you're to blame for your death really, and not the game itself. Now, going through on multiple characters, you probably got 3 to 5 hours on full playthrough time. If you can drop that off a bit if you know your way around the levels. I mean, again, with them 6 characters, it does give you a bit of a boost. You're probably looking at 10 to 15 hours to complete the game completely, but that then doesn't add in the fact that if you do that, you can still come back to it and get a fair bit of fun out of exploring the levels still and getting into the action scenes. And there's lots of areas, like I said before, that I like. They're like death traps with things firing from above and within, and then there's things going off and explosions and bullets and everything going on all around you. You've got to really be quick on your toes and snappy. And of course, the controls are absolutely amazing. It really responds well, especially when you up the levels of the characters, and especially when you get further on later in the game. It really does become something amazing. Again, those reduced character numbers do hurt it, because it would have just upped the playability time, give you more reason to come back. I mean, man, this is a really great game at the time, and I understand why it was highly rated. I mean, when I was playing through on single player, I got stuck on, I think it was World 4-1 or 4-2. It was about as far as I could get. I couldn't get through to the ending myself. I did try, guys. I had to watch the rest through on a gameplay video. I'm sorry. It was too tough. But the thing is, I'm going to be going back. I've got my passwords and stuff, and I will be trying it again, because I think I'm going to be able to complete that. I'm going to be able to keep coming back and keep pushing on, and it's really enjoyable. I mean, it was highly praised at the time, and for a Gauntlet, it's not a Gauntlet clone, though I can understand where it gets. Like the Gauntlet idea and the design of that, like a dungeon to explore, and then goals in mind, and the way you get through the levels, and you know, there's loads and loads of enemies coming at you constantly, and constantly having to use weapons and fire, and you know, keep things away. And this is a very good like 16-bit adaptation of that idea, but it really does surpass that. It really does become something special. Now, of course, I had issues with it before I went in, but like I say, 20 odd years later, and I'm really thinking, I don't know why. I think experiencing it in 2-player has completely changed my mind on it. So I really had a fun time with this, and I would recommend it to anyone. It's an absolutely fantastic game. And with that, I think it's as good a time as any to finish the podcast. I would just like to send out a big thank you to Dan from Lemon Amiga. I had an absolutely fantastic time with this game. Really great fun playing it through. And I recommend go on Amiga Live, try that service out, because it's free and you'll have loads and loads of fun with it. If you like this episode, you can drop me a comment at AMIGArama Pod over on Twitter or facebook.com/AMIGArama. I'll always answer. There's always the Discord server as well. Until next time, guys.